Streaming. All right, I think we're ready to go. It's on the YouTubes and stuff. So let's get into it.
Right, I think we're
Hello
ready
everyone.
to go. It's on the
Holy crap.
YouTubes and stuff.
Let's mute that. Whoops. Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Modern Meltdown. Today is not very fun because there's a whole like Russia invading Ukraine situation going on, which is not great. And we'll be talking about that later. With me, of course, is Matthew Soul. Why don't you
Hello,
say
everybody.
some things?
Yeah.
So Matt, you wanted we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about I think the Liberal Party's attacking of the union and labor movement in due time. But you wanted to talk about something fun or something at the top of this. So I'll let you take this over for now.
Yeah. So look, I think we all need a little bit of levity in our lives at the moment. There's a lot of anxiety out there. So I thought let's talk about something a little bit fun. Now, everyone would have to say that Bob Hawke is probably one of Australia's most beloved prime ministers. The man himself had a record for drinking more beer than anyone else. And I don't know what makes you more Australian than that. So it's recently come to light in a new biography that's been written about the man by his second wife that suggested that Bob Hawke himself could have indeed been a sexual addict. And when the job got way, way too stressful, he had 3 to 4 women on the go. And to be honest, I don't really expect much less from Bob Hawke. The sex lives of our politicians. Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. So the former PM's widow, Blanche D. Alpaget, I believe is how you pronounce it. I'm probably butchering that, has revealed he had at least 4 lovers during his time in the lodge, and that he used extramarital sex as a form of stress release while married to his first wife, Hazel Hawke. Sex will calm people down, and he was a very highly strung man, she said. At the end of the day of intense activity, he somehow had to let off steam, as it were, and there's nothing like a roll in the hay or 5 to do just that. So there you go, folks. Bob Hawke, not only was he an amazing beer drinker, but he was essentially Australia's James Bond as well. So there you go. Just a little bit of levity to start us off.
Yeah, that's right. But I think that goes into like a general sentiment of leftism in general. So like all the people who on the right, who fall into the right wing and like who valorize like the act of sex, leftists get a lot of sex. It seems like they're just having sex all the time. So look, if you want to pick a side, you got to choose the left because we're banging all over the place. It seems so. It's that's my recommendation.
I think that's a great call to arms for more progressivism, Tommy. If you join us, you'll have more sex. It's sort of.
It's not a guarantee. I'm not going to guarantee that. It would just seem, if you just look at the different circles and how they interact with one another, with like various groups, it's like, yeah, leftists are always talking about banging.
The right has definitely cornered the market on being conservative, and they definitely love the idea of everyone having one sexual partner in their life, and that they only procreate for children and nothing else. Whereas the left are, a little bit more groovy, a little bit more hippie-ish.
Mm-hmm.
So that book, and I'd highly recommend actually checking it out because these books are always fascinating. The book is called Demons and Destiny by Troy Bramston. And there was actually an infamous photo of Bob Hawke. He was sitting on a deck chair, shirt off, of course, with that glorious hair that he had, and it was glorious. He had a glorious mane. In the book, they also mentioned that the lady that was behind him, pictured in that infamous photo, he was also having an affair with. So, good old Bob Hawke.
Yep.
You can check that book out. I'd highly recommend it. I believe it is coming out very, very soon. So there you go.
Yeah, cool. Read it, I guess, if you want. So with that lightheartedness out of the way, Matthew, what I don't know how much attention you've been paying to the current geopolitical conflicts that are occurring.
Too much.
Okay, so yeah,
Too much, I would say.
What's been your reading and what you've gathered thus far about the Ukrainian Russian conflict?
So I see this is where it gets a bit tricky, because I'm definitely not an expert in geopolitics. The Ukraine issue has been brewing for quite some time. The reason for it, as far as I can sort of glean, is that the Ukraine has been petitioning NATO to be accepted, and basically Vladimir Putin, who is the president of Russia, has very little interest of having NATO on their doorstep. That's essentially what Ukraine would have been. For people who don't know, Vladimir Putin is an old school KGB agent, and he absolutely loved the USSR and the Soviet era, and was, saw it as a personal tragedy when the USSR was disbanded. And so as he has become more oligarchical, as he has become more of an authoritarian over the years, he has pushed into places like Crimea, and now he is moving into the Ukraine, essentially to prevent the Ukraine joining NATO and having NATO on his doorstep. Now, on top of that, Russia also is going through a lot of problems at the moment. There have been suggestions that their population has not grown enough to reach what they call renewal status. That's where enough people are being born to not only replace an aging population, but to also caretake for it. They've been hit pretty hard economic-wise, and their Russian-made vaccine for COVID-19 has not been doing great. So generally what the authoritarian will do during times of great strife is they will go to war. It's a great distraction. So that is my basic understanding of the Ukraine situation. It's been on the cards for quite some time, and their constant pushes to get into NATO has definitely set off it set off Vladimir Putin. If you have a look at all the footage that's coming out, doesn't even seem like his government and his advisors want this to happen. Like, he is strong-arming everyone by the looks of it. What people will forget, however, is that there is a real human cost that is going to be played out here. There is a human cost on both sides of this. Obviously, Russian troops will be killed. Obviously, Ukrainian troops will be killed. We've already seen that happening now. And, there's also this is not fully endorsed by the Russian people either. I think it should be said a little bit more often that there were mass protests in Russia. Very brave individuals who have been arrested on the spot, thrown into vans and disappeared. And, they're protesting this just as much. This is essentially, from my perspective, another proxy war between Russia and America. We've been going through this for a long time.
Okay.
I feel like it is in a lot of ways. The interesting thing about this is, while Russia isn't a huge player as far as the globe goes, like, you don't really think of Russia in the terms of, say, a China. Like, China is very big. It has a generally strong GDP, quite a significant army. We don't really think of Russia in those respects. Like, after the fall of the Soviet Union, which was essentially spurned on by the Chernobyl disaster, which I will talk about a little bit as well, because Chernobyl has been taken by the Russians. It's now under Russian control as of today. There's, I think there's always been this urge within some oligarchs within Russia to try and reclaim that former glory. Russia does have one of the largest standing armies in the world. It is quite a powerful military might. And I think that, good old Vladimir Putin may be wanting to remind everyone of that and trying to reinstigate that Soviet era, that Soviet territory. So I think it comes down to a lot of things. The Americans have been in the Ukraine for quite some time, especially like it's common knowledge that the CIA has been in the Ukraine for quite some time. There's a personal urge from Vladimir Putin to reinstigate Soviet era territories. There is the urge to push NATO back so that NATO isn't crossing their borders. And there's also an urge to distract the Russian people from the absolute terrible situation that they are facing as far as their renewal population goes and all the problems that come with that. So I think it's multifaceted, but at the end of the day, the blame for all of these deaths, and there will be a substantial amount of human suffering, falls straight on the shoulders of Vladimir Putin, and I don't think people should forget that, especially if this smaller conflict escalates into a much larger global conflict, and we all are hoping, and if you're a religious person, I would suggest praying every single day that we don't see a global conflict. But that's my take on it.
Yeah, I mean, look, if a global conflict happens, it'll be because Russia's done something really stupid. Because I think it's pretty evident from the last week or so of what's been going on that the West doesn't want nuclear Armageddon to occur, and so that's why they're not sending troops into Ukraine, and that's a line that I don't think anyone's going to cross. The other thing. I don't necessarily think that this is a proxy war between America and Russia. NATO as a thing is not that great. Leftists will decry NATO existing, and that's fine. But I think they overstate its impact in terms of like aggressing in this instance. I think Putin, given what he has said. And what he's sort of been about, whether or not NATO expands is sort of irrelevant. He is going to be taking these territories anyway because he wants to bring things back to the Soviet Union era of territorial control. He wants that land, and it is. And we saw as much through his speech that he gave when he essentially declared war and said that. Like he basically just gave blood and soil arguments. So he's basically doing the Nazi thing and saying, this land belongs to us because those people are the same as us, and so we're going to go over there and take it.
Yeah, exactly. He brought up the ancient land argument, which is, like you said, Tommy, it's this blood and soil shit. The idea of like Russia's history is incredibly complicated. In certain ways, figureheads like Rasputin switch the gears. Like at a certain point in time, Russia was going to move into a system that was very similar to Britain, where you had a sort of symbolic monarchy and a strong democracy behind it. And then an individual named Rasputin came into the mix and became a religious advisor, which kicked everything into high gear. I would highly, highly recommend, if you are interested in Russian history at that point in time. Last Podcast on the Left does an entire series on Rasputin, and it is very, very fascinating. The man had such a pivotal role in the way that Russia would progress. But after the Tsar and the Tsarina are kicked out of Russia and then executed by Lenin, and the idea of communism, or at least what started out as their idea of communism, which would later evolve into essentially a dictatorship with Stalin. They've moved down a very complicated path. World War II complicated things. The Cold War has complicated things. And like you said, like Vladimir Putin wants a restoration of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union fell due to a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest was that the Chernobyl nuclear plant had basically, it suffered a catastrophic event, and it blew up. It essentially blew up. The reactor was exposed to the world. It's one of the world's most dangerous nuclear sites on the planet. Now, the reason that was such a detriment to the Soviet Union was because it revealed at the time that that sort of government is not able to function because everyone is too busy trying to save their own asses and move up through the party, that they will ignore certain safety procedures, they will ignore the truth, they will try and cover each other's asses. And so what happens is you have a disaster like Chernobyl that could have poisoned the entire European water table. It could have been one of the worst disasters that the world had ever experienced. And it was a massive black eye for the Soviet Union. Once that happened, there were further pushes to really move Soviet Russia out of that, and then it slowly started to fall down. Now, Vladimir Putin was one of those old KGB guys during that era and ended up, hitting the bottom of the poverty line, like he said himself in the 1990s, who was driving a taxi around because he had no money. So you could imagine for someone whose status is such an important thing to the man to go from being, a high-ranking member in the KGB to suddenly driving a taxi. And since then, he has slowly wormed his way into taking over control of Russia to the point where the man now has $200 billion in personal wealth. And that didn't come from nowhere. I know our politicians in most cases do get paid a reasonable sum of money, but I don't think anywhere in the lines of $200 billion. Some have suggested that the man is a criminal, that he has been taking Russia's GDP and putting it into his own personal coffers. And the day he dies, Russia will not know where their money is. So Russia has a very, very complicated history. And this, it's one of those things where I think, Tommy, and I'm curious as to what your take is on this, really, this entire conflict can be put on the shoulders of one man, and that man being Vladimir Putin.
Yes, I mean, yeah, this conflict, probably, sure, yes. I mean, he's an autocrat, right? So he does control Russia, and this is a pattern of behavior that he's shown before, in Georgia and in Crimea. And again, in both those instances, and especially in Ukraine, there were diplomatic options that he had that he ignored. Right, so the Minsk agreements that the Ukrainian, the secessionist groups, and the Russians signed, the Russians basically just ignored and continued to fund those secessionist movements, and also continue to agitate things in that region. Like, there were meant to be ceasefires and stuff like that. So the Minsk II never was able to actually come into fruition, which would have given peace to the land. And that agreement, the Ukrainians actually ceded, would have ceded autonomy to those regions. So they would have still been a part of Ukraine, but they would have had their own governments and shit or something. So this idea that the West is at fault or should be doing more to de-escalate and to negotiate or whatever with Russia is absurd to me. I don't know where it comes from other than just America bad. And that's it. And you can say a lot about America having control over NATO, but given what Biden has been doing thus far, this seems to be a very sort of a European sort of issue. more than anything
Yep.
else. And NATO is designed to put all of these disparate groups together to fight Russia, because Russia likes to do this kind of shit. And Putin is continuing that legacy. And so, if anything, out of this, he will only strengthen NATO expansion, because NATO isn't annexing territories, right? But people on the left will conflate the NATO expansion as the same as annexing territories, right? But it's not. Countries express their interest to join NATO, so they have to decide of their own volition as a country to join the defensive alliance, and then they are accepted or not. And Ukraine has been rejected twice from NATO, so I don't know where this where that like NATO expansion line as an aggression comes from.
I think like everything you said there, I think is 100% correct. NATO is an organization. It is not a it. Yeah, it's interesting. It's not an invading country. It's not annexing territory. It's a security agreement for the majority of the Western world. I will also say that the Americans can't put boots on the ground. It's as simple as that.
100%.
We can't put boots on the ground. The Americans can't put boots on the ground. But what will happen is there is going to be a public face to this conflict. And this is, again, where my experience with weird crap in Australia is going to come to the forefront a little bit here. There is going to be a public view of what is going on. And then there's also going to be a clandestine view of what is going on. So right now, CIA, ASIO, the Five Eyes Security Defense, which is made up of Australia, New Zealand, the UK, America, Canada, they're all going to be waging cyber attacks, and they're going to be hitting Russia where it hurts. As I said at the start of the stream, I nearly said podcast there, at the start of the stream, we have CIA who have been in the Ukraine for the last 5 years. And from what I have read so far, based on what the strategy will be in the Ukraine, is that the CIA have been prepping the Ukrainians for waging a guerrilla war, essentially. What will happen is, as the Russians slowly move deeper and deeper into Ukrainian territory, a lot of the Ukraine standing army will actually stand down. And what will happen then is they'll become a sleeper agent. So as the Russians move forward into Ukrainian territory, they'll essentially be leaving behind them a guerrilla war type situation, where the soldiers who have stood down as the invasion progresses past them will then start attacking the Russian from behind on a second front. So they'll be fighting at the front, they'll be fighting at the back. The problem is, as well, though, is that Russia does have air superiority. So honestly, I think that the Ukraine will be taken over relatively quickly. I think there will be mass casualties on the Ukrainian side. And then what you're going to see going forward is essentially methodology used by terrorist organizations, where they'll be doing hits and runs against military assets held by Russia. And that is essentially what's going to happen. The rest of the world is doing everything that it can. Sanctions are being applied. Cyber attacks will be ramped up. And not only that, vigilante groups like Anonymous are now also attacking Russia.
Yeah, they took down their propaganda. Russia Today, I think, is the news channel. The news channel.
Yeah, news, quote unquote. So yes, I think when it comes down to it, I think the world is responding to this conflict in the only way that they can. The NATO expansion idea, Tommy, if I can push back a little tiny bit here, is not just something that that the left rile against. It's also something that the right has been riling against. And we've also, that it's the one thing that seems to unite the left and the right at the moment is that argument that that NATO is just annexing territory. And
Yeah.
you've seen it, like we've seen it almost immediately. Right-wing media in America switched to a pro-Putin stance. Fox News' Tucker
Yeah.
Carlson immediately took that stance. Donald Trump also has taken that stance. And it was Donald Trump that also tried to hold hostage $400 million in US military aid for the Ukraine during his time. And Vladimir Putin was quite happy to have Trump in the White House. And these are the seeds which are now blossoming right now. This is exactly what was always the plan. It would have been much easier for Putin had Trump gotten his second term.
Can you imagine what this conflict would be like with that level of chaos in the White House?
There wouldn't have been a conflict. I would imagine that Donald Trump would have sent American troops to support the Russian invasion.
He probably would have just nuked Ukraine.
God knows what would have happened.
It's
thankfully we're in the, I would refer to this at the moment, we're in the murkiest timeline, not the darkest timeline anymore. But yeah, that nightmare scenario, Tommy, God knows what would have happened there. I don't even think it's. I'm not going to sleep well at night if I even think of that nightmare scenario. But this is what's been on the cards for a long, long time. I think in the long run, while there will be this massive loss of life, and that's something everyone needs to keep remembering. These conflicts kill people. People die. And a lot of older individuals that I've talked to are like, well, you've got to have a bit of a war to settle these things. Humans have been murdering the shit out of each other now for thousands and thousands of years. I think it's time we try something new. And when you see, Russian aircraft just lobbing missiles into civilian buildings, I think we know exactly what this is. And it's disgusting, it's deplorable, and it should be denounced. Speaking about it locally, though, what it's going to mean for our political landscape is it will play further into the Reds under the bed scare, which is going to be essentially the Liberals' platform going into our next election. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to talk about that later, but that's fine. We can jump to that now. So there was this article written by, let me see if I can, by Mark Sawyer from Michael West. And I'll bring this up on the screen now. So he was basically analyzing like this event and what it means for the election, and comparing it to the historical elections of the past that either went Labor or Liberal, and I think his analysis essentially was that it's not actually that bad historically for Labor in these elections. But in terms of like, I kind of don't care. I think Scott Morrison is kind of going to do this kind of stuff anyway, and this part of the general right-wing liberal playbook. But what I found really interesting about this article is the quote that it uses right at the end here. And I'll read it out for the listeners. The government justifies its actions on the ground of Chinese expansionist aggression. Now, keep in mind, before I continue reading this quote, this was a speech made by Colwell in 1965, right? So the Red Scare thing is a long-standing tradition, okay?
Yep.
And so to continue, and yet this same government is willing to continue and expand trade in strategic materials with China. We are selling wheat, wool, and steel to China. The wheat is used to feed the armies of China. The wool is used to clothe the armies of China. The steel is used to equip the armies of China. Yet the government, which is willing to encourage this trade, is the same government which now sends Australian troops, in the words of the Prime Minister, to prevent the downward thrust of China. The government may be able to square its conscience on this matter, but this is logically and morally impossible. And it's the same exact shit is happening now. Like we're not going to stop sending our iron ore over there, but we'll absolutely beat the drums of war and say that our government is the only one capable of taking China on while also sending them all of the things they need to defend themselves and attack us
Yep.
with.
Yep.
And this is why you can't trust the Liberal Party or that level of propaganda.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's like, you know, they're coming for you, they're coming for your children, but we're going to send them all these resources. Doesn't make any sense. You know, you really can't have your cake and eat it too in this case. It's either, you know, they're a enemy combatant or they're not. You know, so a decision has to be made there. And when it also comes to the Ukrainian conflict, I'm sure China is watching very, very closely to see what sort of moves they can make when it comes to Taiwan and whether they can pull off a similar move. Again, I think at the end of the day, when it comes down to all of this, like I think that smarter heads will prevail. And as far as the Australian response goes, you know, we've offered sanctions as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's not
And
much we can do, but
there's not. Like, we're tiny. We're absolutely tiny. There was a journalist who met Vladimir Putin a few years ago, and he said to Vladimir Putin, "So what do you think of Australia?" And Putin turned around without skipping a beat and said, "I don't think about Australia." That's what he said, you know, and that's how he sees it. Like, Australia is the breadbasket for the world. We produce a lot of food that is exported all around the world. We produce a lot of the raw ore and iron and materials that the rest of the world uses to build their cities. That's where Australia functions. We can definitely hit them in the purse, and I think we've done that to a certain extent. What's your experience been like on social media? Have you seen the Russian bot farms out in full swing this week?
I don't really pay that much attention to social media, but I have been following. If we're going to bring this back to Ukraine, the conflict sort of live. It's been a very fascinating experience because nowadays with current technology, you can watch people who will stream live and just gather pieces of information that come in through social media. So there'll be just tweets and stuff like that and everything that comes in. I have seen a lot of I haven't seen any like the bot farms and what they tweet out, but I have seen like what the Russian false flag videos and stuff of them like, oh, look at us being attacked by Ukraine, and it is embarrassingly bad. But yeah, that's about it. I just think it's really cool to be able to see all of this stuff from like any vantage point. Like, you don't need the media to tell you what is going on. You can sort of actually just go and see it for yourself, which is really cool. So like last night, you know, rather than doing any productive work, I was just watching someone stream some cameras that were just live cameras over Kiev, because the idea was that it was going to get bombed that night, which made sense militarily speaking from a Russian perspective. That didn't actually happen, but part of the reasoning for doing that is basically just to bear witness to the events that are about to occur, so that we can, you know, go back and go, look, this is war, this is what it's like. And most of it is just waiting in anxiety for the bombs to drop. And vicariously, even though I didn't do that, I was like, I didn't experience all of the anxiety that the Ukrainians were suffering, hiding in their the subway systems and everything like that. But it is similar, just waiting for these bombs to drop, you know? So that's been a cool thing to witness. What's yours been like? I think it seems like you've had more of an experience with that on social media than I have.
Well, yeah, look, in prepping for this week's stream, what I wanted to do is sort of get a bit of a feel out of, you know, what how the Australian public feels about this and what is the political response. I think it's one of those rare times when you actually get a unanimous political response, both from Anthony Albanese and from Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Both sides of the aisle have condemned what's going on, and so that they've been posting in social media, basically, you know, we support Ukraine, we support the Ukrainians, we condemn Russia. And then I've definitely had some interactions with the Russian troll farm. If you don't understand how that works, all around the world, there is active interference when it comes to social media. Facebook has been the most wonderful tool that the Chinese regime has been able to utilize, the Russian regime has been able to utilize. In Russia, it's so sophisticated that in their warehouses, which are just filled with computers, you actually get more money based on how good you are in social media. So at the bottom level, the very bottom rung, you are paid a certain amount of money and you can maybe get away with a very broken English conversation, you know, bad spelling, bad grammar, et cetera, et cetera. As you move up through their system, you get paid more, and you get paid more based on how long you can keep a conversation going, what information you can get across, how many Facebook followers that you can change, and how much propaganda you can spread. Very recently, there was a study conducted which discovered that Russian interference, Russian misinformation was spread most effectively by a guy up in Brisbane and a man in Florida. So they just planted the seeds and then and watched it take off, which was just incredible. So what I've sort of been doing is like, okay, if I post, you know, I believe that the Ukraine, it should not be attacked. I think that Russia is wrong, and I posted it in the liberal Facebook group, the Scott Morrison's personal Facebook page. So I was like, I'm going to plant this seed and then see what comes of it. And it was amazing how quickly there was all this Russian propaganda sent at me. One is a very famous meme. It's got a very handsome photo of Vladimir Putin at the top, talking about how he is kicking the big global banking conspiracy out of Russia. And when I started to see posts like that, I was immediately clued into, okay, their propaganda machine is up and running. And then I decided to take the piss out of them for about 10, 20 minutes. Which is something that I like to do when it comes to Russian bots. And the other side of this is, though, and we've seen this through the conspiracy movement that is trying to take over our country, which is run by they were anti-vaxxers. They're now deep down into this this conspiratorial thought. They believe that Vladimir Putin is their savior somehow. I don't quite understand it. I guess it's that they're in love with the strongman idea. Proud Boys have left Australia. They're headed to Poland to go fight with the Russians at the moment. And so they're becoming combatants in a war that we've declared as unjust and that we have not sided with Russia. And there has been absolutely no mention from any authority whether those men will be allowed to return to Australia once they do whatever that they think they're doing, which I think is an absolute disgrace. The fact that these people aren't being called out. When Australians went over to fight with ISIS, when Australians went over to fight with the Kurds, they were immediately listed as terrorists. But if you're a white Aussie Proud Boy, apparently you can fuck off over to Poland, fight with the Russians, and no one seems to bat an eye about it. But I'll bat an eye about it, and I'll bring it up because it's absolutely fucking disgusting. And it is not who I am. It's not who this country is. And I think those people should be denounced. That being said, their ideology comes from Russian and Chinese trolls, and their susceptibility to that social media propaganda is absolutely in full swing, which is also why, like over in America, Republicans are praising Vladimir Putin. Like, you know, they're basically licking his boots.
I mean, I'm not going to necessarily say that that's because of their propaganda. I think that's
well, they all fit
authoritarians
into that
liking authoritarians.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. You're 100% right. That's exactly what it is. Absolutely. I think when it comes to how most Australians feel about this, you know, I think they fall into our camp. Tommy, no one wants to see anyone killed. A lot of people feel that this is completely unjustified. And, you know, that makes me proud of the majority of Australians. But there is a minority group that are supporting what is going on over in Russia. I condemn them. They're not Australian. They can wrap themselves up in the flag. They can have an Australian beach towel and wrap their fucking whole body in it for all I give a shit. They are not representative of who we are, and they're not representative of how Australians are feeling about this. And honestly, I think it's a mix of terrified because no one wants to see a global conflict, and absolutely heartbroken to see those images coming out of the Ukraine of people being murdered in their buildings. And because of what Tommy brought up earlier, we actually get to see that in real time. This is going to be a conflict that actually has quite a significant amount of digital infrastructure behind it. So you're actually going to see this actually play out in real time, which is going to make it extraordinarily difficult for propagandists to try and spin. Like you said, Tommy, they released these propaganda videos that were pathetic, that were easily debunked, and it is going to be very difficult for Russia to be able to control the messaging. And it's even difficult for them to control it for their own people. That's why thousands and thousands of Russians were marching in protest against this war. This is Putin's war. No one else wants this. I'm sure a lot of the soldiers who would now have boots on the ground don't want this. I'm sure.
There are just very quick, Matt. There are there are reports of some troops, I think yesterday this happened, where one of the troops, I don't know if it's like a whole battalion, but there was a division of troops that went in, and they basically just surrendered to the Ukrainians because they thought that they were just there for reconnaissance. They didn't want to kill people because they probably see past the propaganda a little bit, and they were like, these are Ukrainians. These are, if they are our people, as Putin has declared them as, blood and soil, etc., then why are we killing them? Right. And so I think for a lot of the Russian military, the morale is very low. And I'm going to bring up something really quick because I've been following this guy that's been on the ground. Well, I mean, I say that he's just been covering it from his vantage point, and he brings up all of these points, and I'll just read through them. But here's an update he did about 2 hours ago. The Ukrainian situation update as of 10:30 CET. The offense is slowly becoming a disaster show for the Russians. According to local sources, Russian soldiers are knocking on locals' doors in villages in the northeast, wanting to buy food, fuel, and booze for whatever money. There are reports of tankers going around with empty fuel canisters asking for fuel. Also, there is looting of local stores by Russian soldiers. Also, in other places, things are looking increasingly grim for the Russians. As I've said before, they intended this to be a blitzkrieg, which obviously didn't happen. At the start of the offensive, their primary objectives were the following, and we can probably ignore most of that. These were Russian plans, roughly speaking. Out of these 7 goals, 0 were achieved. Ukrainians got intel in time about the incoming missile strikes and shuffled everything around. Consequently, Russian missile strikes only had limited effect. The Ukrainian chain of command and much of their hardware remained operational. The Donbass demarcation line holds still. Russians couldn't break through anywhere. Moreover, the Russians breaking through above the line were pushed back by Ukrainians, who launched a counterattack with Russian forces fleeing towards Russia. The Kharkiv encirclement failed. Russians got bogged down. That's where they suffered their first significant losses. Kharkiv is on Ukrainian hands even now. While the southern breakout from Crimea was initially successful, Russians were once again held up at Kherson and Melitopol. This couldn't advance much more or link up with any other groups. Consequently, the Crimea land bridge project failed. Russians got bogged down around Sumy and Chernihiv. In the end, they decided to bypass the 2 cities altogether and move towards Kiev instead. Russians first looked at Hostomel Airport with a huge helicopter deployment, which was considered reckless at best by military experts. Later, Russian paratroopers were dropped in who are considered their elite forces. Ukrainians managed to defeat them and kick them out of the airport, which is a huge loss of face for the Russian army. And I think also these Russian paratroopers that were going to land in Kiev were there to basically find the president and get him to either sign a thing that divided Ukraine into east and west, like with Berlin back in the day and stuff like that. But that didn't happen because the Ukrainians foiled that threat. 7. Troops from the northeast and northwest are trying to link up for an assault on Kiev while bypassing cities, but in the process are taking losses due to Ukrainian harassment. As of the writing of this, Russians are still not ready for encirclement, let alone a siege. Currently, the indiscriminate shelling of Kiev is underway instead. So this was what most people thought was going to happen last night, because normally you do shelling at nighttime and then you come in with your troops during the daytime. But I think because of all of this other stuff and then not being in position, that's only starting to happen now. So from this, we can draw the following conclusions. Russians grievously underestimated the Ukrainian defense forces. The Russian army were given very unrealistic objectives they couldn't complete, suggesting strong political pressure instead of rational planning. Russian missile strikes and air forces are very poorly organized, therefore ineffective. With such overwhelming air superiority, they should have already decimated Ukrainian defenses. This did not happen so far. Russian logistics are very poorly organized, as illustrated by the info in the beginning. Soldiers' morale is low and lack essential supplies such as food or fuel. Putin is slowly realizing the extent of the problem. As a sign of this, he called on the Ukrainian army to rise up against their government and told Kiev he's ready for negotiations. As a rule of thumb, you don't do this when your victory is certain. The more time passes, the more desperate Russians get, and the more brutish methods they'll resort to, such as the aforementioned indiscriminate bombing of cities. This, in turn, causes massive discontent both at home and among the troops. Even according to Russian propaganda, their troops are there to liberate Ukrainians from the evil Nazi junta, not to murder their Ukrainian brethren. This is where the myriad cross-border, familial, and cultural connections seriously backfire for Putin. So I thought that was a very comprehensive sort of breakdown of what is happening on the ground now in Ukraine, and sort of goes to show that what we thought of as on paper, Russians just winning because of air superiority, all that kind of stuff. When you're on the day, the performance is what matters. And I think there's a lot of what is on the statistics of how many planes you have that isn't shown here, like the morale. And, your soldiers having to beg Ukrainian locals for food, that's a very concerning sign if you're Putin right now.
Absolutely. Actually, I want to speak a little bit. This is going to be a war that actually could be won or lost on the back of morale, Tommy. And I want to talk about just this little story. It comes from news.com via the New York Times Post. And
would you be able to quickly link that in the chat?
I can.
I'll bring it up on the screen.
It's only just come across my feed here, so I'll just put it in our chat, and everyone can check it out for yourselves. Okay, so Ukrainian soldier blows himself up on bridge in heroic final act. A Ukrainian soldier is hailed a hero for blowing himself up to destroy a bridge in an effort to stop Russian tanks from invading his country, the New York Post reports. Marine Battalion Engineer Vitala Skanen Vladimirovich, I did my best, was deployed to Heinrich Bridge in southern province of Kherson with the Russian tanks advance, the Ukrainian military said on its Facebook page. On this difficult day, our country...
Where's this link? Sorry, hold on a second. Sorry, guys.
Oh, sorry.
Where's this link?
It's just in the chat, in the YouTube chat.
I'm not getting... I haven't seen it.
That didn't come.
I need. Can you post it in the Zoom chat, and then I'll post it on. I can put it on the screen so that people can.
Yes,
can watch it.
Absolutely. Let me just do that. See, this is a technical glitch, but that's okay. We're learning. This is only our second.
Yeah, I got it. Okay.
There you go. You got it there. We'll bring that up for everyone to read through, and I'll just continue forward once you've got that up.
Yeah. All right. Let's go. I'm in.
Okay. So yeah, if you just jump down to the third paragraph, just there, on this difficult day for our country, when the Ukrainian people give way to the Russian occupiers in all directions, one of the hardest places on the map of Ukraine was the Crimean Intersection, where one of the first enemies met a separate Marine battalion, according to the Post. When the battalion decided that the only way to block the armored column was by blowing up the bridge, Vladimirovich volunteered to place mines on the span, the General Staff of the Armed Forces said. And when he realized he had no time to get to safety, the brave soldier made the ultimate sacrifice on the bridge, which connected Russian-occupied Crimea and mainland Ukraine. According to his brothers in arms, Vitaly got in touch with them and said he was going to blow up the bridge immediately after an explosion rang out. Which means that they're now slowed down and they had to go the long way around. If you're going to be playing this game of propaganda, I don't think the Ukrainians are buying into it in any way, shape, or form. Now, let's let the other side of this could all be Ukrainian propaganda as well. We don't
Yes.
know. You know,
But
we don't know
I
that.
think what the distinction here is that even if this is propaganda, I mean, I have heard reports. It was funny that there was like there was a fighter pilot that got ace status at the beginnings of this conflict, and they call him the Ghost of Kiev, which is friggin' awesome, by the way. But again, like we have no confirmations of this mysterious pilot shooting down like 5 aircraft. So that is probably propaganda. But what it does is these kinds of stories. There is some truth to them because the Russians have been slowed down, and these kinds of stories help to lift the morale of the troops. And even if it is a lie in this instance, I'm cool with it on the Ukrainian side.
Oh
Because
yeah,
it helps,
look,
it lifts the spirits and everything like that.
if it's a lie, it's a very effective lie, because one thing that the Ukrainian forces have, as we've mentioned before, is the fact that their morale, you know, they are now being galvanized into, we need to protect our country, we need to protect our family. Everyone in the Ukraine who wanted one was given a weapon, and you know they're going to be pushing back as hard as they can. And whereas on the Russian side of things, they're underprepared, they were underwhelmed, they don't like fighting people that could even be family, like they could have family ties to Ukraine. They were told, look, you're going into to kill terrorists, that's what you're going to be doing. And they've walked in, and of course they've just been abused by the Ukrainians. There's another video circulating around of a Ukrainian woman basically telling them to fuck off. And she also said, here are some seeds, put them in your pocket so that when you die, your body will fertilize something new that will grow in the Ukraine. Fuck off. And all the Russian soldier could do in response to that was say, oh, you're escalating the situation. And the fact that we have access to this real time information is going to be very, very detrimental to the Russian aggression here. I also wonder, Tommy, though, how long will it be before Russians attempt to shut down their digital infrastructure, and at what point do we stop seeing those videos coming out of the Ukraine? I wonder how long it will take the Russians, because they're losing the propaganda war.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about that is the speculation. Like generally, what happens in conflicts like these is that that's like the first thing that happens. You destroy the any communication going in or out of the country. And I think that's I don't know exactly why or what Putin could have done in those instances, but generally that's what you want first, so that stuff doesn't get out. And it also allows, and I think one of the benefits that the Ukrainians have is that they have American intelligence at their disposal. So there's a lot of things where they can probably gather the Russian troop movements much more effectively because of, you know, those spy satellites that America has access to, that they're probably just passing on to the Ukrainians.
Oh, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
So yeah, that's another advantage that Ukrainians have. Yeah.
Like as I said earlier, the CIA have been in the Ukraine for the last 5 years. The American CIA also can act with impunity. They can just do whatever they like with zero accountability, so that the president has plausible deniability. They've been there quite some time because, like, you know, let's be honest, at the end of the day, Russia being, you know, having the Russian military assets knocked back a few pegs is definitely within the Americans' interests. The other big sanction that I wanted to talk about as well before we move on to more domestic issues is the German pipeline that they've essentially shut down. That project that is really going to hurt Russia. And on the other side of that as well, that could mean that it will push Europe further into renewables. So that's another silver lining to a very dark cloud.
Yeah, it could be. Hopefully that quickens that process up. To bring this back onto local politics for a second, I think I'm going to say it was Albo. Let's just say it was Albo who was attacking the Morrison government on being like, we're going to pay, as Australians, as individual people living in Australia, we are all going to have to suffer the consequences of this conflict. We are all going to have to pay much higher petrol prices and things like that, and for gas and whatever. And Albo came out and was like, hey, yo, wouldn't it have been good if the Liberal Party wasn't in charge and we had like electric vehicles and shit like 10 years ago? Wouldn't that have been good?
Yes.
And then we wouldn't have been affected by this goddamn conflict, right? And so again, like that's going back to that quote. That's why you can't vote for the people who sprout that fear mongering propaganda, because they will fund those kinds of things that are bad. Whereas people like the groups like the Labour Party and the progressive movement aren't going to do those things. And we're going to isolate ourselves from being as interconnected in that way on fuel and all that other kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that's a pretty meaningful attack. I don't think it's getting much news in the press, but I think it's it is quite effective, or should be at least, if the media is on the side of progressives. But I guess we'll see in the coming campaign whether or not Labour can utilize it as a really good attack line, because I think it's really effective.
I hope they do. Like, honestly, like their campaign ad should be like, hey, are you pissed off that you're paying $2 a litre for fuel? Well, we had a plan to make sure that Australia wasn't, fossil fuel dependent. And the Liberal Party decided, no, that was a shit plan, and threw it out. So I think that's going to be very effective. I don't know about yourself, Tommy. My cost of living has gone through the fucking roof. Where, I'm now paying $60 extra when it comes to, well, it's probably even more than that. Holly looks after the budget because I hate that shit. So I just give her money and she takes care of it, which is lovely. But at the end of the day, we do have to have those budgetary meetings, just like every single household around the country right now. And when we were talking about, okay, we need to start cutting back this, and this, because our cost of living has gone up. And what that means is, if my cost of living goes up, I'm not going to that small business that the Liberals say is the most important thing in Australia to go and buy things from, because I don't have that surplus cash anymore. And I'm the one who will do that, Sorry, I'm just seeing on my... Oh, there we go. I'm back.
Back. Sorry about that.
Sorry,
I minimized the window, but that's a bad plan. Okay, so just since I've interrupted you, I may as well continue. So you were asking me how my cost of living is, and because of the way I am, being single and also like extraordinarily frugal, it hasn't affected me that much. But that's just because of who I am, and I think. But like the point is that I'm probably within like the 0.001% of the population that lives this way. And you do not make policies based on people like me. You make them off of your general population. And so I think it is important that we look at, the cost of living. And like, this is exacerbated now, but this has been a simmering issue for a long goddamn time, because wages haven't been keeping up with, inflation and everything else. Yep. And with current supply chain shortages and, petrol prices going up because of this conflict, that's only going to get worse. And I hope people realize that it's the Liberal Party's fault that this is happening. Because the Reserve Bank for a long time have been like, yeah, we're going to reduce interest rates because literally that's the only thing that we can do to help the issue. But hey, but like subtly they've been saying, hey, government, can you do something about wages, please? Please, can you do something about wages? And nothing has been done about wages. So... but that's in the government's purview, and they, again, since they're part of the elite, they don't actually want workers to have more money and more buying power and more time to, think about politics and do all that kind of stuff. You have to be stuck in your little hole working at a retail or whatever and not thinking about anything else. That is a strategy of the elites to keep the lower class down. So...
Yeah. So let's actually talk. I want to talk about that because it's going to lead into probably the other story that we're going to cover this week, which is the railway strike in Melbourne. In Sydney, rather. Mm-hmm. So this is how economically we can break down how much the lower and middle class contributes. Lower and middle class will spend 110% of what they earn. Matthew, that's a crazy number. How do they spend 110% of what they earn? Well, they do that by also having credit cards with the idea of paying off that debt down the track. A multi-millionaire, multi-billionaire generally will spend about 30% of their surplus. Okay. So based on those two numbers, and again, you can use statistics to prove anything. 95% of all people know that, so go and check out these numbers for yourself. That's a little statistics joke there for you.
Yeah. Nice.
Now, those are averages, 110%, 30%, those are averages. And you can go have a look at those numbers for yourself. So if the middle and lower class are the ones contributing more to the country's GDP and their wages stagnate or in some cases go backwards, that means the money that small and medium businesses depend on also gets reduced. So my personal example, right now, our budget has gone up by $60 to $80, depending on the week. That $60 or $80 would normally go to leisure activities. So that $60, myself and Holly would take it to the movie theater. We'd buy an ice cream and a popcorn because you have to when you go into the movies. And we would have the ability to see more films more often. That hasn't happened. I'm someone who will go to the movies, watch the tiny little independent movies, watch the big movies. I will go as often as I can. I love going to the films. I have not been to the movies since December. I will probably not go to the movies until March. That's 3 months of my surplus spending removed from the economy. But let's take it even further. One thing that I absolutely love doing is reading comic books and supporting my local comic book store, Impact Comics. At the moment, every time a mini series or a series finishes, I will generally look at replacing that series with another ongoing series. But I can't do that at the moment. If my subscriptions at Impact Comics dwindles down to nothing, that is probably where it is going to have to stay until more money comes into my household. Impact Comics has 2 owners, and I believe they have 3 casual workers. My money not going to them directly affects another 5 people. Those 5 people then have less surplus cash to dump into the economy. That will then have another flow-on effect. Because the packers, they're not going down to your local grocery store. They're not going down to your small business to put money into the economy. They put it in their bank account. That's where it lives, so that they can be perpetually wealthy. It's the lower and middle class that keep this country going, and bad policy, like not investing in renewables so that we're not suckling at the gas teat like we are, could have happened. The Labor Party had that plan in place. The Liberal Party didn't want renewable energy. And not only that, we are subsidizing the fossil fuel industry, which means even more of your tax money that you're generating is going there. And wages are stagnating, inflation is rising, and the people who keep this country going have less money to keep it going. Your money is the fuel that keeps the furnaces burning. And without it, this country stops. And that takes us on to our next story. We're going to be talking about the Sydney transportation strike. So do you want to talk about that, Tommy? You want to take it from there?
So I think we'll just start with the link that you posted in the show notes. I'll bring that up and we'll just play it. It's only like a minute and 18 seconds long. Did you actually wanted to watch the video or?
Yeah, let's chuck the video up. Yeah.
Okay, so this is from the ABC.
I am always late, but at least today I have an excuse.
I feel the anger of everybody across our city. This is a concerted campaign by the unions and the Labor Party to cause mass disruption across our city.
The New South Wales government's managed to be the first government in history to close down the rail system without there actually even being a strike on. Now, in say to the New South Wales Premier, you close the train network, it's your opportunity and duty to open it back up.
We are not on strike. All of the people behind me, all the people sitting in the meal rooms all across the network are ready to work at a minute's notice. We're all there. We're ready to do the work.
Them saying that it's the government's fault is quite ludicrous. As if a government would want to stop the rail network.
Who made the decision to halt train services?
That is obviously a matter for the management of Transport for New South Wales. That's their decision.
So the Transport for New South Wales did shut down?
Well, you can't operate a rail network without a guarantee that there would be a safe way to operate.
They've locked out their workforce and they've inconvenienced the people in New South Wales just because it was going to be a little bit difficult. And I mean, I don't know how to put it any stronger than that.
So yeah, I think so. What? And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Matthew, because you probably know a little bit about this more than me. But as far as I'm aware of what is happening, the local New South Wales government shut down the train system for a day or something, and they used that to attack Labor and the union movement more broadly.
Yep.
And literally everyone was like, hey, why have the train stopped? And then they were like, oh, it's because of the unions. Gotta not vote Labor. And then the Labor Party and the unions are like, yo, we're not striking. We're not doing that. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I skipped the part where I was meant to say that the New South Wales government are saying that this is strike action from the unions, but it's not. As we saw in that clip, the union guys were like, yo, this isn't a strike. And that's as much as I know about that event, I guess.
Yeah. So the basics of it is that there was enough people left to make sure that the trains continue to run. What is going on at the moment is there is a move to privatize Sydney Transport, Sydney Rail. And so those workers want to make sure that the EBA that they have, the enterprise bargaining agreement that they have, stays in place, that there will be wage growth in the future, and their concerns were not being addressed. So what they've done is, a skeleton crew would have essentially been left to run the transportation network. And what Sydney government did, what the New South Wales Liberal government did, was shut down the network. And then their plan was to redirect commuter anger towards the union movement and the rail workers, so that they wouldn't be getting these guarantees that they're being pushing for with their enterprise bargaining agreement. So it's a direct attack on the worker. It's a direct attack on the union movement. And then the icing on the cake for the Liberal Party of New South Wales is that it's also an attack on the Labor Party, because the Labor Party is linked to the union movement because it is called the Labor Party.
It does. It's so stupid, right? Because prevent the strike from happening under a Labor government, which is happening under our government.
Yeah, essentially that's what that was what the messaging was. Now, going further, one of the ministers in the Liberal Party New South Wales cabinet also called the workers terrorists. He said,
right. He denied that later as well, but he straight up said that this was terrorist action that they were doing. So
yeah, that's what he said. He's on record saying it. And then he went on to say, no, I didn't say that, because these lunatics don't realize that the people that they attack are also voters who have families. And again, these are working class individuals which far outnumber their private paymasters. It is a problem in this country where organized labor is constantly kicked in the guts. As I said before, 110% of middle and lower income earners are dumping 110% of their money into the economy. That's where their money is going, which means, and this is something that, full disclosure here, I've been a union member for a long, long time. I'm part of the SDA, which is a retail union. I've also acted as a delegate within that union for a couple of years as well. I stopped because, and I'm going to be perfectly honest here, people burnt me out a little bit. I got a little bit mentally exhausted by doing it, but I never left the union. I've been a union member for most of my working life, and the reason for that is that organized labor needs good representation. When we all work together, when we pour a little bit of our hard-earned dollars, and they are hard-earned dollars, into union coffers, those unions can then represent us. The Liberal Party doesn't like that. They don't like organized labor. They don't like representation from the lower and middle class, because all of their policies affect us directly. And they don't like it. They don't want us to have a say. And as Tommy said earlier, they want us tired and run down and unable to do anything. And I know what that's like. In our household right now, currently my wife, Holly, is working a part-time job and a full-time job. Right? She's doing 2 jobs. And that is going to thankfully just get us by. But I tell you what, it's been tough on us, and we don't have kids. We don't have dependents. We don't have chronic health issues, but it's tough for us. It's tough for my mates. One of my friends said to me the other week, I had a choice. I could either afford to pay the power bill or turn on the air conditioner in summer in Australia. That's the choice that working class Australians are now making in this fucking country, where they have to choose between air conditioning or being able to afford their power bills. So when they say that there is a problem with labor being underpaid, Australian labor workers being underpaid in this country, yeah, there is a big problem when my buddy can work a full-time job and can't afford to turn on his bloody air conditioner. That's a real problem that we have in this country at the moment. The other side to this argument as well, well, not other side to the argument, another facet to this interesting story was spoken about by Friendly Geordies this week, Jordan Shanks. If you want to go check out his YouTube channel, I'd highly recommend it. Both Tommy and myself are supporters of his work. They unearthed messages that were sent from the Sydney Morning Herald, where the journalists themselves were turning around saying, we probably shouldn't call this a strike. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Tommy?
I mean, look, I don't have that much to add to that, but it was literally just the people who were writing the stories are like, yeah, we'll kind of call this a shutdown. And then like the editor-in-chief or someone I assume higher up went down there and was like, this is a strike. But
and this
it just goes to show like the environment in which the progressives are up against in the media sphere currently, where and the power that's like specific people hold within those kinds of institutions, and that's really scary. That one person can just be like, "No, it's a it's a lockdown, it's a strike," and that's all I'll say about that, and that's it. And then those workarounds have to go and do the thing, and then it comes out and it becomes this in the media landscape. The people who ingest that, unironically, will just be like, "Oh yeah, fuck the union movement." And all based on a fabrication. So, yeah, with the election coming up, that is what I like. That's what I will always be. What isn't sentimental, but I will always be on Labor's side on this because of that. The environment in which they are fighting against is so incredibly against them, that even if they have to make certain strategic moves that would be perceived as bad from the left, I understand that they have to do that because of what the field of play is and what they're up against.
Yeah. Look, I don't like to tell people how to vote. How they're going to vote is how they're going to vote. But I tell you what, if you're a small to middle business, if you are a lower or middle income earner, even up into the higher echelons now, like if you're earning $100,000 or $200,000 a year, you need to be paying attention to this as well. The fact is that if you think that a liberal government is going to improve your life, we've got 12 years of evidence that suggests it's absolute bullshit. We need to stop listening to the messaging that's being pumped out there. The word progressive has been co-opted into, we want everyone to be able to identify as a goldfish named Sally, who lives under the sea. That is like, it's all about identity politics when you're talking about progressives. Progressivism is not just about identity politics. It's about a good day's work with a fair day's wage at the end of it. It's about good infrastructure. It's about renewable energy, lowering the cost of living, allowing you and your family to be able to go to the movies, to have an ice cream while you do it, and a popcorn without it breaking the bank, without you not being able to afford it, without you having to make decisions like not being able to turn on your air conditioner. Progressives want you to be able to not only have your cake, but to eat it as well. You don't need to suffer under the current leadership anymore. We have that ability. We have that option. The word progressive needs to be used in a far more positive light. As Tommy said, the media is against the Labor Party. The way that government is built is against the Labor Party. The social media
you can say this
chat
about just
is
about
against the
like
Labor Party.
progressivism in general, and the Labor Party to me is just the largest bloc that is progressive.
Yeah.
And so I will bring them up on that stance, because with the elections and all that stuff, it's important for me to note that the Labor Party might not be that great, but we do need a unified bloc to combat the right, which will always form a unified bloc. So sometimes when you're talking about like voting independent and all those kinds of things, in Australia, that's not as bad as the situation in America, but we still have to think about the field of play and what is happening. And if you're going to vote independent and that's just going to lose you a Labor seat, then you haven't actually achieved much in terms of that unified bloc, because it's just the same numbers on the progressive side versus the right-wing side. And so what we really need to do is to make the Liberal Party lose. And so if you're going to vote independent, it should be in liberal strongholds, or maybe in the marginals. But yeah, that's the way I think about it in terms of how the game is played mechanically and how the electoral system sort of works. Yes, there are preferences, but at the end of the day, if we all vote in our independence and all that kind of stuff, when they go into parliament, when they're small, they can and they don't actually have power. They can do things based on their independent and ideological focus. But when they need to pass legislation, they need to combat the bloc that is the right wing, and that only happens when you unify and have like certain concessions within that mass of independence or whatever. And so that's why like the Labor Party is already that in my eyes. Like there are going to be more conservative elements within that, but on the whole, it has always been left wing, and its policies, as has been borne out through history, have always been left wing and will continue to be so. As far as I'm concerned, like the leadership within the Labor Party, I think, have shown that, from Bill Shorten and with Anthony Albanese as well. So, yeah, I mean, in future episodes when the election is coming, when it has been called and we talk about it, it will be something that I think I will harp on more. But yeah, that's a little bit of a prelude rant, I guess.
Look, I'll tell you who I'll be voting for right now. It's definitely going to be a progressive candidate. It is probably going to end up being Labor at this point. That may change depending on any independents that do pique my interest. But I will say this much: when it comes down to someone who was born with a silver spoon up their ass, or someone like Albanese, who came from a single parent family, who worked his absolute ass off to get where he is, Albanese is going to be getting my vote based on that, because he represents me and my friends and my family who are working class, who have had to fight for everything they have. If someone like us wants to be the leader of this country, well, I'm very much more inclined to vote for them. And as there is no doubt in my mind that liberals and conservatives within the Australian political system are only interested in themselves. And if you can prove otherwise, I'll give you a crisp $100 note, because I don't think anyone's going to be able to do that. Honestly, I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is on that one. Name one single federal liberal policy that has helped us in the last 15 years. Just recently on Weird Crap in Australia, we recorded a 2-parter on the Black Saturday bushfires. And of course, that brought up a lot of feelings and emotion concerning the Black Summer bushfires. I can tell you right now, when the Royal Fire Service approached the Liberal government for more firefighting equipment so that they could battle what was coming, the Liberal Party said no, both federally and state. And everyone, keep that in mind, right? We're talking about working class. We're talking about, let's make this as simple as possible. A Liberal government will not help to increase your wages. A Liberal government will not fund firefighting services. 2 facts. And it's as simple as that. Progressives will.
Yeah, 100%.
And unless you
yes.
Sorry, yep, go ahead, Tommy. You probably want to take us out.
Okay, so one of the things that just as we wrap this up, Chris Minns, who is a Labor MP, we saw him in that little clip. This was on like a couple days ago, where he was like, it has been revealed that Dominic Perrottet and the New South Wales government were planning a 2-week-long train shutdown in Sydney. So they were planning this. And that the decision to shut down the network was made last Thursday. It is implausible that the minister or the premier was not aware of this. So again, it goes to show that how scummy these politicians are. These Liberal Party politicians are, that they knew this shit was going to go down. They knew they're going to shut it down, and they're going to use that as a tactic to attack the opposition and unions as a concept. So, as far as I'm concerned, I hope they lose every seat that they hold. That, like, this level of I mean, this is basically corruption. Because I mean,
it is absolutely.
Because again, they knew this was coming and they planned it out. Like they can plan for this level of shutdown or whatever. And so this can be extrapolated to whether or not something gets funding, whether or whatever else, and they can decide to use that for political gain, as they have done here. I mean, this isn't that big a deal, I guess, but it is indicative of their general lack of principle.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way of putting it, a lack of principles. Because, again, you know who was hurt during those that train shutdown, Tommy? Working class
workers.
People trying to get to
people
their
trying to go
jobs.
to work. Yeah.
Yep. You know, for example, some of those people needed the trains to get to their late night jobs for their penalty rates. Well, some of them probably had to call in sick, which means they had less money that week because they wouldn't have got those penalty rates.
Right. Yeah. And the penalty rates, which probably only exist because of unions.
They only exist because of unions. Yes.
Like no corporation is going to want to pay you for extra for that kind of stuff.
Yep. You know, one call out for unions, and again, there have been corrupt unions in the past. It would be foolish of me not to say that. The majority are not corrupt unions. They're made up of good, solid members who just want the best for working class Australians. If you're able to, I'd highly recommend joining a union so that you can make your presence known when it comes time to negotiate with people who have more than enough money to pay you a fair wage.
Yeah. And the more the stronger the union movement is, the more protections and all that kind of stuff we have. And so we see, and I don't know whether this is because of unions in Europe, but stuff like, you know, the 4-day work week is being proposed over there. And imagine, you know, if you got that kind of stuff here, like I don't think any union would oppose that as a concept because it just means you as a human, as a worker, are allowed more time. You're probably going to be more productive because you're not slaving away and mentally breaking down from working too much. And also you have more time to spend with your family and with friends and to, you know, spend money in the economy on that extra day that you have.
Yeah.
So
when I was growing up, families could live on one wage and nothing was open on a Sunday. Nothing was open on a Sunday. when I was growing up. The town shut down. There was a half day on a Saturday after 12 o'clock. That was it. Nothing was open. And people could be able to live and afford, luxuries on those wages. So we have gone backwards, where people are now working 7 days a week. We're going backwards. And that is an undisputable fact. The gig economy has made it so much worse. And it's going to keep getting worse until till the labor movement in Australia, workers in Australia start fighting back. And when you do that, the first fight is going to be at the ballot in the next few months.
Yeah, and part of the reason the gig economy is as dystopian as it is because they have no union representation.
Absolutely.
There's nothing. There's no group that can go against like Uber as a block. Does not exist. But if they did exist, then there'd probably be more protections and rights and all that other kind of stuff. So, yeah, like the union movement is very important.
I've got a perfect example for you, Tommy, to send us out. The Amazon workers in America, just recently when hurricanes and tornadoes came busting through some of their facilities, the workers were told they were not allowed to leave that building, and people died. Simple as that. In Australia, the retail union, the SDA, have started making inroads into Amazon. Nowhere else in the world has this happened. And Amazon workers in Australia have more protections and better pay than Amazon workers in America. Simple, plain fact. And that's because they have a union behind them.
It's good. Go unions. Go unions.
Let's get labor in there, people. We can do it. We just got to ignore the stupid messaging. Progressives are not all going to ruin your lives. They're going to help you. It's an absolute fact. That's pretty much it, I guess. Those are probably the two biggest stories this week. I mean, the Ukraine being the biggest one, and lots to think about.
I want to end. I was gonna do this as part of the Ukrainian segment, but I want to end this on a particular speech that was given by the Kenya's ambassador to the United Nations Security Council. Because again, since I was watching that live with those other streamers, I normally wouldn't watch any of these, but this one floored me in what it got across. It's a beautiful speech, and so I'm just gonna play it out here. It's about 5 minutes 40 seconds long. And I think it if you read into it correctly, it basically shows why what Putin is doing in Ukraine is completely inexcusable, no matter what his justification is. And his justification is obviously, these people belong in my border, and I'm going to invade them because of that. And I think, given the history of Africa, which this Kenyan ambassador is going to be talking about, we will see that is not a justifiable excuse for invading a country.
We meet tonight on the brink of a major conflict in Ukraine. The diplomacy we urged on the 17th of February is failing. The territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine stands breached. The Charter of the United Nations continues to wilt under the relentless assault of the powerful. In one moment, it is invoked with reverence by the very same countries who then turn their backs on it in pursuit of objectives diametrically opposed to international peace and security. In the last two meetings on the situation in Ukraine and the buildup of forces by the Russian Federation, Kenya urged that diplomacy be given a chance. Our cry was not heeded, and more importantly, the Charter's demand for states to settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered has been profoundly undermined. Today, the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of Ukraine has been effected. Kenya is gravely concerned by the announcement made by the Russian Federation to recognize Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine as independent states. In our considered view, this action and announcement breaches the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We do not deny that there may be serious security concerns in these regions, but they cannot justify today's recognition of these regions as independent states, not when there are multiple diplomatic tracks available and underway that have the ability to offer peaceful solutions. Mr. President, this situation echoes our history. Kenya and almost every African country was birthed by the ending of empire. Our borders were not of our own drawing. They were drawn in the distant colonial metropoles of London, Paris, and Lisbon, with no regard for the ancient nations that they cleaved apart. Today, across the border of every single African country live our countrymen with whom we share deep historical, cultural, and linguistic bonds. At independence, had we chosen to pursue states on the basis of ethnic, racial, or religious homogeneity, we would still be waging bloody wars these many decades later. Instead, we agreed that we would settle for the borders that we inherited, but we would still pursue continental political, economic, and legal integration. Rather than form nations that looked ever backwards into history with a dangerous nostalgia, we chose to look forward to a greatness none of our many nations and peoples had ever known. We chose to follow the rules of the Organization of African Unity and the United Nations Charter, not because our borders satisfied us, but because we wanted something greater, forged in peace. We believe that all states formed from empires that have collapsed or retreated have many peoples in them yearning for integration with peoples in neighboring states. This is normal and understandable. After all, who does not want to be joined to their brethren and to make common purpose with them? However, Kenya rejects such a yearning from being pursued by force. We must complete our recovery from the embers of dead empires in a way that does not plunge us back into new forms of domination and oppression. We rejected irredentism and expansionism on any basis, including racial, ethnic, religious, or cultural factors. We reject it again today. Kenya registers its strong concern and opposition to the recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states. We further strongly condemn the trend in the last few decades of powerful states, including members of this Security Council, breaching international law with little regard. Multilateralism lies on its deathbed tonight. It has been assaulted today as it has been by other powerful states in the recent past. We call on all members to rally behind the Secretary General in asking him to rally us all to the standard that defends multilateralism. We also call on him to bring his good offices to bear to help the concerned parties resolve this situation by peaceful means. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by reaffirming Kenya's respect for the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. Thank you.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what part of the video you're on, because you're probably on a little bit of a delay, Matt. But like, I think the territory, the African stuff is Jesus Christ, the African stuff is super important, because we can get locked into thinking about how things affect us because America, etc., etc. But we forget that all of the stuff that happened to Africa and what they've sort of given up in order to try and maintain peace and to move forward. And Putin's acts in Ukraine have completely gone against those principles. So
the the one comment that absolutely shines through to me after that speech, dangerous nostalgia. And it's just such a powerful statement. And it is the biggest problem with the world at the moment. Dangerous nostalgia. We got to keep moving forward. We can't go backwards. Society is a train. It's got to keep chugging along, and we've got to keep moving forward. We don't need a return to the Soviet Union. We don't need a return to, when men were men and women were women. That shit is done and over, and good riddance to it as well. Dangerous nostalgia. The fact that we are now facing potential global conflict over nostalgia is just so... I honestly don't have words for it. I never will. It's just heartbreaking. I mentioned this on Facebook not too long ago. My parents, when I was growing up, were quite concerned that the Yugoslavia conflict would create the potential for global conflict. And I remember them being very worried about it. I remember them watching the bombings on the news, when NATO dropped the bombs. And the Americans dropped the bombs there. And they were very, very worried. I didn't want to experience that as an adult. And here we are. We're back to the 90s. We're back to the 80s again. And this is on top of, let's not ignore the fact, and I think people have been doing this. Let's not ignore the fact that in this country, we've been through catastrophic bushfires with huge amounts of destruction. There is a trauma lingering there. We have now gone through 3 years of pandemic. There are traumas lingering there. We are now worried about global conflict. Enough is enough. Personally, I'm a bit over it. Anxiety levels for the world are through the roof. And, dangerous nostalgia has a lot to play in regards to all of this. So, we need to start making a change. How do we do that? Well, we start at the ballot boxes. That's how we make a change. And we need to be a little bit smarter as well. We need to start being able to process information a lot better than we do. We need to stop buying into bullshit. That's the big one.
As the Russian propaganda machine is still working in full force, be wary of the things that you read and all of that.
Absolutely.
But I think it's been a pretty good show. I think that was a good way to end it. It started off pretty good, very funny. Good old Hawkeye, what a legend.
Yep. Hawkeye was a beer drinking sex fiend, and if that doesn't say Australian Prime Minister, I don't know what does.
Yeah, absolutely. We need Alvo to be more to be that. Although, I don't know, that probably wouldn't play very well. Yeah, a little bit less maybe. But he's on Women's Weekly now, so I'm optimistic as to the strategy that is being employed, because he's getting out there and he's getting that personal side. This is what's annoying. Very quickly before we end, this is what's very annoying is the media won't tell you who Anthony Albanese is. He has to do it out himself. He has to go into these kinds of mags to do it. So. Yeah, anyway, I guess that's good any note to end the show for this week. So I hope you all enjoy your time. Probably don't look into the Ukraine stuff too much, lest it bog you down. But if you feel compelled, there are plenty of streamers and whatever that you can get that information from. And one day that might be us even doing live streams of conflicts and things like that.
Just, I think you're right, Tommy. Take a break. Everyone also needs to remember that your mental health is important. Take a break. Put the phone down for a day and don't fucking look at it. It's going to drive you crazy. And I am speaking from experience, it's starting to drive me crazy. So it's just put that phone down, at least for a little bit. Take a break. Have a chance to breathe. Watch a cartoon, read a book, do whatever you have to do to make yourself feel a bit better. But you are allowed to take a minute for yourself as well. You don't always have to be switched on. I am still trying to learn that lesson. So that's really important.
and I feel kind of bad because I've sort of forced Matt to do this show with me, and he has to be switched on in some capacity. So Matt, I'm sorry, and that'll end episode, I guess 3, 1, 2, whatever episode this is. It's ending now.
Yep.
Goodbye.
Yep, exactly. Just before, I'll just quickly plug my
Yep.
stuff as well.
Oh yeah, that's a thing that we do.
Yes, we have
Yes,
to.
Matt, do
Yes.
that, please.
So if you'd like to hear more from me, I produce a podcast called Weird Crap in Australia with my co-host Holly Soul. We're both social historians, and we've been chronicling Australia's strangest tales for the last 4 years. We've got 2 books out at the moment: Weird Crap in Australia Volume 1 and 2, which you can get on demand from lulu.com. You can also grab from impactcomics.com.au, and you can grab that on your Kindle in an ebook edition. We've got our 3rd book coming out in September. You can also find us on all the social medias, Weird Crap in Australia on Facebook and Instagram, and you can find me hanging out on Twitter. My handle is @WeirdCrapInOz. We've also got a comic book out there at the moment, Killaroo Semper Fi, and we've got another comic book in the works right now. So just a couple of things. If you'd like to hear more from me, that's where you can do it.
Nice, good stuff. See you next week, everyone.
See you guys.